First part of session 90. Let's explore how do extraterrestrials look like. Interesting, huh? Let's begin. Okay, if you know me, you should notice that I am very picky with the language that I use when speaking about these subjects, especially because I am perhaps too aware of the way we tend to create a mystery surrounding these topics. In the past 100 years or so, we have been creating all kinds of fantasies as to what is this UFO phenomenon and what do aliens look like, and it has become a subject to be ridiculed. Thankfully, thanks to the law of one, we have a model that explains things in a much more elegant way as opposed to the way our imagination has been working for, like I said, over 100 years since we started exploring the ideas of entities in other planets and so on. So the title is just basically for clickbaiting. That's it. I'm honest. So I'm interested in discussing, of course, what Ra says here, which is the mechanics and how this actually is created. If I could even call it mechanic, it's just the ways of manifestation of form. So we're going to explore that in beautiful detail. So this session's probably going to take me, again, 2-3 parts. We'll see if we can cover as much as possible. But again, this first part is going to be concerned with exploring the ways in which other entities manifest their physical form, if that makes sense. Or in the short way, how do ETs look like? And we're going to cover even different densities. So it's just so rich, so beautiful. Let's get into it before I keep going without giving you the meat of this session. So we start with the first question as usual. Don saying, first, please give me the condition of the instrument. So how is Carla? And Ra says, the physical complex energy deficit is somewhat increased by continued distortions towards pain. The vital energy levels are, as previously stated, having fluctuated slightly between askings. So again, nothing too extraordinary here. Just a reminder, we're listening to a conversation between Don Elkins and the social memory complex known as Ra. So they're talking through the instrument of Carla. And this is the regular monitoring that they do just to see how she's doing in her energies, and she had very distorted physical being, like arthritis and other issues in her body, and that's kind of like the physical part. And the vital energies were fine at this point. They were fine, so nothing to comment there. Question 2, Don says, could you tell me the situation with respect to our 4th and 5th density companions at this time? Ra says, the 4th density league of companions accompanies your group. The 5th density friend at this space-time nexus works within its own density exclusively. So I'm doing a bit of a refresher to what this all means for the regular listeners, but since some new people may be attracted to the law of one at this point, especially because of the title, we're talking about a model of reality that speaks of different densities in which beings are manifested, and that's a whole study in and of itself. But here they're referring to a specific situation that they were dealing with in the contact with Ra, and that was that they had attracted negative entities who were doing their offering, which again is another study to do within the law of one, but that's what they're talking about. So for the regular listener, you know who the 4th and 5th density negative entities are and what they were doing. And so, what do they say? They are the 4 density, for reasons that we'll find out. The 4 density entities were with the group, whereas the 5th density was working from remotely, let's say. That's something that I can say now and makes sense. I'll explain that as well, why 4 density was there and why 5th density was working remotely now from home. Oh, it sounds so silly now that I hear it. Question 3, Don says, by what means do these particular 4th density entities get from their origin to our position? So Don is interested about the moving, the transportation. How do they arrive here? Ross says the mechanism of calling has been previously explored. When a distortion which may be negatively connotated is affected, this calling occurs. So we have different callings to which negative and positive entities are actually approach us. And again, we have talked about this mechanism of calling before. This would have to be, willingly calling them. Also by ways of your distortions, you may call them. And as a side note, then the negative ones are also those who offer themselves without being asked. So that's another way of calling. When a distortion which may be negatively connotated is affected, this calling occurs. So this could be, through situation, through your own mind, through anything that may require a negative intensity to the experience that is happening. And so that would be the calling, as far as I remember. There's also other details that I won't get into because they're too nuanced. But yeah, those are the major ones. Ra does explain other types of approaching. And they say, in addition, the light of which we have spoken, emanating from attempts to be of service to others in a fairly clear and lucid sense, is another type of calling in that it represents that which requires balance by temptation. Thirdly, there have been certain avenues into the mind-body-spirit complexes of this group which have been made available by your 5th density friend. So let's go with the light. So there is the calling, which again is situational and depends on the configuration of the entity, of the person. But then there is the attraction when you are doing service to others, when you're engaging, especially in this attempt, which was very much intense. The light that was being channeled is huge. And so similar temptation for balancing needs to be offered. Everything in the universe is balanced. So if you're doing something, its opposite needs to arise. That's just how it is. We can call this good, bad, higher, lower. It doesn't matter. It is one and its opposite when you're doing some type of work in consciousness. So that is the other type of calling. And again, it's about balancing. In this case, because they were positive, it's a temptation to the negative, to the ego structure. So you move to the positive, the negative needs to be present. Not because you need to carry it with yourself, but because it needs to be available also for the choosing. This is true for all 3rd density experience. The last one is, as I understand it, they say that there has been a certain avenues that the 5th density negative entity has sort of made some inroads into the group. So it has already created these distortions, and we don't know which one they are. I am assuming, by the way I feel it, that this had to do with the different distortions that the group started creating. I don't know which ones they were, but let's say certain behaviors, right, or attitudes that were starting to be seeded by this negative entity. So that, I think, is the other way in which they approach. Now, Don is going to ask further, but you see, he was interested in knowing, and let me get this out of the way so we can explore on a deeper level. Don was a physicist. I mean, he was a mechanical engineer by trade, or at least by studies, and he was a professor, but his mind was as a physicist. He wanted to know dynamics of movement and all of this within the material paradigm. Far from trying to disprove the material paradigm, Ra would suggest certain things. But the thing is that Don's questions are coming from the material paradigm, meaning that these entities exist outside of our influence or of our reality of space-time. And so how do they move towards us? How do they manifest here? How do they travel? You see, and so there are subtleties to this because we don't use space-time in higher densities as much. Again, there are nuances here that I'll try to cover, but the point is that Don is asking this, and that's going to be his next question. Question 4, he says, actually, the question I intended was, how do they get here? By what means of moving? So you see, moving in distance, in space-time. And so Ra offers this explanation and say, in the mechanism of the calling, the movement is as you would expect. That is, the entities are within your planetary influence and are, having come through the quarantine web, free to answer such calling. So, in the specific mechanism of the calling, right, the movement is as we would think. They must be present, right, in the influence, the sphere of influence, which is the planet here. So, again, because they are here, they can answer the call. That's basically what they're saying. They don't need to move. Like we would say, I'm going to Europe, or I'm going to Russia, or Japan, or Indonesia, or whatever. It's not that type of space movement, that transportation, but rather there is more work in consciousness, in mind. Fourth density particularly is starting to learn these ways because that's what they learn to move to fifth density. So the entities are here, and I think they're talking about the fourth density entities, that they need to be here. Like I said, the other ones are working from their own density, the fifth density negative entity. So that's the first thing that we need to establish. There is no such thing as needing to move, although fourth density needs to move in a different way than fifth density, but let's not complicate that. The point is that it's not as our human physical form travels, if that makes sense. They go on to explain that temptations are offered by those negative entities of what you would call your inner planes. These, shall we say, dark angels have been impressed by the service to self path offered by those which have come through quarantine from days of old. And these entities, much like your angelic presences of the positive nature, are ready to move in thought within the inner planes of this planetary influence, working from time-space to space-time. So that last part, when they say working from time-space to space-time, is in essence what I said about working from consciousness or mind, not space-time. For those of you who don't know, space-time refers to the physical realm, this material, 3 dimensions of space, 1 of time, and time-space is related to metaphysic or mind, where we move in 3 directions of time, past, present, future, in only 1 space, which is the now. So that's the difference between the two, basically mind and body. Body being space-time, mind being time-space. So, a lot to get into this paragraph, actually. They say that the temptations that are offered by those negative entities, those would be fourth density. I don't think they say it here, but that's what they're talking about. I mean, they don't say fourth density, but we have learned so far that temptations are offered by fourth density primarily. So they're offered. How are they offered? That's the question, right? So there are fourth density entities, negative entities from other planets, and they're doing their work. How do they do it? It's interesting how they explain here. They call them dark angels. I love that. So dark angels have been impressed by the service to other self. Actually, dark angels are not the negative entities of fourth density. This is a whole different topic, and I'm only going to summarize it. But yeah, let me show you the diagram that I have in my mind. Recently, actually, I was talking to Julie, my wife, about how angels work and what are angels. And I just gave her my explanation of what this means to me. You see, the way we describe angels has always varied from culture to culture, and yet all of them speak of angels, and then they speak of demons. You know, what are we to make out of all of this? Well, if there's one thing that is common across all cultures, is that angels are known to be positive beings, or always eliciting some sort of inspirational, motivational, enlightening experience, where demons are doing the opposite. So if we can just regularize this by saying positive experiences, negative experiences, then we know that there are streams of thought at different levels and intensities that vary in the experience of life. Yeah? So if this is the experience of life, it's either positive or negative. That's how our mind runs, right? It wants certain things and it finds them pleasurable, good, and so on. And then there are undesirable experiences. So those are positive and negative experiences. And the whole dynamic for the negative entities is to manipulate you, to make you feel good in a certain way that is always taxing, because they're taking that energy, that creative energy of you, so for their own purposes, because the negative entity is void inside. It doesn't have a heart, or at least it does, but it's not using it. So the negative entity, that's the way it works. Through the let's say this mechanic, I'm going to call it mechanic again, of positive and negative, then we call them angelic beings. Yes, presences, positive and negatives. These are under the influence of the planetary sphere. Again, if we go back to the model, and I apologize for the new viewers who may be listening to this, but this is the model of the law of one. Within the model of the law of one, we have densities. And so we have first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh densities. We are living, or we are experiencing, third density. Now, third density has 7 sub-densities, which are related to the energy centers or chakras. My model, my mental model of angelic and demonic beings, is that these beings within the planetary sphere are in the sub-densities. So we experience angels in these. That doesn't mean that there doesn't exist in other densities, because it's holographic. But at least, as Ra is explaining here, I just want you to become aware or visualize the possibility that these beings are within the energy system, right? And so clearly a frequency of the heart is always angelic, whereas a frequency in the lower energy centers may be negative, or it doesn't necessarily has to be, but it's drawing you there. There might be an influence there, and Ra gives a sort of hint to that here. In big caveat, this is my interpretation again, but I think there's a hint in here that I'll explain. But that's the whole dynamic, right? There are densities of consciousness, And then within this third density consciousness, we are having the experience of positive and negative. And those positive and negative experiences are influenced by the streams of thoughts that exist. Some are positive, some are negative. Now, how do the four density entities come in play here? Well, recall that there are four density entities in their own right, in their own home, let's say. And how they do the work is what Ra explains here. Ra says, dark angels have been impressed by the service to self path offered by those which have come through quarantine from days of old. So those who have come through the quarantine in antiquity, right? That's what they're saying. From days of old, in antiquity, they have been coming and influencing the angels, or these sub-densities have been impressed with negative Orion influence, let's call it. Orion being the negative entities. So this creates a sort of dark angel impression. You see, that's the hint that I see here, that I believe this has been, they don't necessarily have to be negative, but they have been impressed that way. So it's almost like we have that egregor, right? Is that the word that we use in English too for this thought form that is agreed upon by the majority or a big part of the population? So that's it. You see, this is almost like, think about it as a sort of virus that has been installed in the system of third density in planet Earth. That's how the fourth density have created their influence in this stream of thoughts which are negative. And it's sort of like they're creating their own dystopian metaphysical reality here, if that makes sense. But the same thing is happening from fourth density positive ones. So again, it's a matter of intensifying the streams of light and darkness for us to make the choice. I could spend easily an hour or two talking about this because there's so much to explain. But that's the best way I can summarize it. Now, what else do they say? These entities, much like your angelic presences of the positive nature, are ready to move in thought within the inner planes. They're talking about the dark angels. They're ready to move in thought, right? That's how we get influence. That's how we pick up this signal. And that signal is, I want something positive for others. I want to be service to others, or I want something for myself. I want to be selfish. Selfish or selfless. It's not only that, but I'm giving an example. And so how do they move in thought? Through time-space to space-time. So I wish I could draw this in the board there, but there is the four density entity influencing for thousands of years the inner planes, right? The sub-densities. And those sub-densities are simply sort of like rivers of thoughts that exist for our mind to pick up. And our minds pick them up and say, yes, I like this temptation. I mean, we don't say this consciously, but the mind does get, attracted to this type of thought, negative thought patterns. And it moves there. Or it does the opposite on the positive one. So that's the whole structure. There is the higher densities influencing the inner planes. The inner planes are the source of thought, and we are the decoding aspect of reality. We are the experiencer, the creator, or at least that part of the creator that is experiencing itself as this particular form. Again, I feel like I have truncated so much in this explanation that I won't even apologize, because otherwise I'll spend the whole session here. Let's go on with now how fifth density communicates or does its work. Ross says, the mechanism of the fifth density entity is from density to density and is magical in nature. The fourth density of itself is not capable of building the highway into the energy web. However, it is capable of using that which has been left intact. These entities are, again, the Orion of fourth density. So explaining again now the densities, we now go to a higher density, fifth density. This is what I called working from home, right, remotely, because they do their work from fifth density. That's why Ross says they do their work from density to density and is magical in nature. Why is it magical? Fourth density seems magical to me. They're working through the inner planes. Well, they're using to my understanding, they're using the word magical as we have defined it in the past as doing changes in consciousness at will. There is a much more powerful use of light and consciousness, light being intelligent energy, that which creates in fifth density. That's what they're training, right, in fifth density. And so there is a greater capacity for manipulation. Now, they do create these sort of avenues, as Ra calls them, canals, if you will, in which these workings can be done. The fourth density is not capable of building these highways or canals, I would say, into the energy web. But they are capable of using the roads that have been paved by fifth density, I would think. So these entities are the Orion entities, and they are from fourth density, the ones that are able to use these canals. So again, the type of work that fifth density entities do is a little bit more complex, but it's not explained here. I won't go into the details. But they work together, of course. The fourth density are the minions of fifth density. They do their bidding, and yeah, that's even another layer of complexity into how this reality is fed more and more possibilities for experiencing both polarities to a degree that is novel to the creator. I know, I am aware that this topic may be raising a lot of goosebumps because we're talking about negative entities, and I, for one, and have been unaffected by this for a while, but I do understand that there is some sort of consideration and concern about the, not being affected by negative entities and so on. So I'll just say that is your choosing, your conscious choosing to realize how your behavior is being influenced. Is it being influenced by that which is natural in you, or is it being influenced by thought patterns that are not you? That I leave obviously to the individual, but that's how you refine basically your own being, and you make the choice. You have to choose one or the other stream of thought, positive or negative. And that's beyond the scope of this episode, but and it goes into self-realization and so on, but I won't get into that. Let's go to the next question. Question 5, Don says, you stated previously that fifth density entities bear a resemblance to those of us in third density on planet Earth, but fourth density does not. Could you describe the fourth density entities and tell me why they do not resemble us? Here we go into the form, the shape of other entities. Ra explains, the description must be based under the law of confusion. The cause for a variety of so-called physical vehicles is the remaining variety of heritages from second density physical vehicular forms. The process of what you call physical evolution continues to hold sway into fourth density. Only when the ways of wisdom have begun to refine the power of what you may loosely call thought is the form of the physical complex manifestation more nearly under the direction of the consciousness. This puts there's so many beautiful ways in which I can draw this model, this diagram of beingness. Let's start with the question. Don is asking that Ra said in the past that fifth density look a lot like us, whereas fourth density do not. What is the reason? This is the precursor for more questions that Don is going to make, but let's make the foundation for this. Ra is saying that, first of all, the law of confusion must be called upon because they don't want to give more details that we should find out for ourselves. So I'm going to open speculation here on my part to explain what I believe is the cause of this discovery that we need to make. And let's see. Most of our thoughts and ways of thinking is that we are material beings, and everything else is a product of this material being. Even when we start believing quantum physics and metaphysics in general, metaphysics referring to spiritual traditions and so on, we're conscious beings, light beings, and so on. There is still the paradigm stuck in our heads that it's the outside to the inside. And we need to refine that. The way to refine this is to understand that, and fully understand, that consciousness is what gives rise to everything. Now, if you know that you are consciousness, then you know that everything that is arising is in essence, it's like a white hole. What do we call a white hole? It should be a star. That is emanating new, so-called new energy, right? So everything is coming from the inside out. So the form, the shape that we have refers to the programming or the configuration or the desire of manifestation particular for this nexus, which we call self, right? This manifested self. And so if we see it this way, then we begin to see that, everything in the creation is actually becoming, it's flowering up or outwards, depending on the whims of the creation, whatever it wants to be. It wants to be an animal, it wants to be a tree, it wants to be a dirt, it wants to be a sun. Everything, there's more structure than just whimsical creation, but in a way there is still, just spontaneous creation happening. So this causes what Ra calls second density physical vehicular forms. Like I said, animals, plants, and so on. Because first there is the material manifested, or matter. What we call matter is the foundation for life, is the foundation for creation. I think I can get away by calling it matter. So that matter becomes alive, it moves, it grows, it procreates, and it dies. And it evolves over time, you see? So this is where we come from. We have figured this out in our science by noticing that, hey, we share a common DNA with many primates. And those primates that we have found in anthropology, look at that, we are these descendants from these. At least those are speculative. We don't have for sure, which one is. But as far as we know, those are the ones that match the best. And so we say, well, we are closer to them than anybody else, which makes sense. But there are some broken links or missing links. In any case, we know that that's where we come from. That's the second density vehicle. Obviously, we look like primates. Lo and behold, we have hands, appendages, and heads, brains, mouth, eyes, and all these things, different to some other animals who don't have exactly what we have. Bipedal form, the whole nine, right? We're even going to discuss opposable thumbs here. How cool is that? That's going to be for the next session, though. I don't think we're going to get to that here. Not next session. Sorry, next episode. In any case, that's where we derive our form. You see, and so we are a product of that form, because it's almost like automatic that it's happening. We cannot influence the way we look. Not yet. Even in fourth density, when we move into fourth density, we cannot influence that, because we're still under the influence of this automatic system of manifestation. We haven't, we're still, fourth density is, and no surprise, is the heart of creation, right? The heart, fourth chakra, is the middle of the energy system, the energy center system. So no surprise, here's where we lose the influence of physicality and we start to work more with our true nature, which is consciousness. So fourth density, we're still under the influence of this instinctive, evolving pattern of movement, which started in second density, moved on to third density, and continued on in fourth density. So we're still under the influence of that. That's why anybody who is from fourth density still looks like their second density ancestors. You see, it's so beautiful. So fourth density, all entities, they look just like, they're changing. I'm sure they're changing. So in essence, we would still look human in fourth density. We would be under the influence. The physical form, the vehicle is still this. However, we will start learning the ways of fifth density. And that's where, when Ra says, well, let me cover, you see, this you will now understand better when they say, the process of what you call physical evolution continues to hold sway into fourth density. Physical evolution being that which started in second density, that movement, that growth, that engendering of more of this pattern of vibration, which we call human form. And so we're still under the influence of this physical evolution. They say only when the ways of wisdom have begun to refine the power, this is the ways of fifth density, so upper fourth density, we start to learn this more, have begun to refine the power of what you may loosely call thought. See, when we start refining the nature of thought, what's the nature of thought? We're barely even grasping at this here in third density by saying, it seems like it's consciousness. You know, other people would disagree. No, thought is just some random thing that happens, and you are in control of thoughts, you, the ego self, and so on. So when we start refining thoughts, right, the power of thought is then that the form of the physical complex manifestation is more nearly under the direction of consciousness. What we started with this trip that I gave you is that as we begin to see this thoughts, the power of thought, then we say that, the physical form that I have is actually made out of thought, of consciousness, so I can change it at will. I'm not under the influence of the material inertia that was the evolution of second density through third density to fourth density, and then you begin to work more with your true nature. Your true nature is formless, and it takes form depending on what you want to form. That would be fifth density. So it's such a beautiful model. I love this because it respects every single mystical understanding that we have had for thousands of years on planet Earth, and it gives a more elegant view onto the way that we are made, or we're not made by anything else but ourselves. So we are a product of our own creation. Again, I feel like I could spend hours talking about this, and we're not even on question 6. So let's move on. Question 6, Don says, well, if the population of this planet presently looks similar to the fifth density entities, I was wondering why this is. If I understand you correctly, the process of evolution would normally be the third density, resembling that from which it evolved in second density, and then refining in fourth, and then again in fifth, becoming what the population of this planet looks like in third. So Don is a little bit lost here, but he finishes and says, why is this planet? He pauses and says, it seems to me that this planet is ahead of itself in the way the mind-body-spirit complex or body complex of that looks. What is the reason for this? Ra says, your query is based upon a misconception. Do you wish us to comment or do you wish to re-question? Yeah, it's very tangled. Don says, please comment on my misconception if that is possible. Ra says, in fifth density, the manifestation of the physical complex is more and more under the control of the conscious mind complex. Therefore, the fifth density entity may dissolve one manifestation and create another. Consequently, the choice of a fifth density entity or a complex of entities wishing to communicate with your peoples would choose to resemble your people's physical complex chemical yellow ray vehicles. I think Ra could have explained a little bit more to Don's mistaken view. There are a couple of things here that I would comment on. I think he was under the influence that even in fifth density, we kind of refine the way we look, and so we look, I don't know, like a stylized version of ourselves in third density, but that's not the case, like I explained. In fifth density, we basically can take the form of whatever we want, because we're no longer under the influence of, I am this shape, I am this body. You see? You can see how there's so many blockages here on planet Earth when people are associating themselves with the body. We have a lot of this because it's all about, how do I look and so on. We have a culture created and reinforced under this, how do we look? This is proper for negative polarization. Again, I'm not saying that if you take care of yourself. I know so many questions are being to be drawn here, but it's about identifying you primarily with your body. Look what's inside, not what the outside. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing is really what we're talking about here. In any case, I don't want to speculate more. But we are definitely under a heavy orange ray influence here on planet Earth. We're talking about just appearances and what's in it for me, I the individual, and me and my labels and so on. But it is as it is. I'm not criticizing it. I think that's, as we will find out, I think this session it's so packed. This is definitely going to be a 3-part session. It's so packed with information that we can go on and on and on. In any case, Don's question was about thinking that we would refine this. And you see, when he says, it would seem to me that we are ahead of ourselves, right? It seems to me that this planet is ahead of itself in the way the mind, body, spirit, or the complex looks. Like we are ahead of the game because we look like this, because other fifth density look like us. This will be explained further, and that's a mistake that Ra didn't explain here. Misconception. There are many misconceptions here, from my point of view at least. And Ra says, okay, so they explain that in fifth density, the manifestation of the physical complex, the body in fifth density, is more under the control of the conscious mind complex. So the conscious mind complex is what creates the world, what sees the world as it is. And so in mysticism, we become aware of that, and we know that our thoughts are shaping the world and are shaping who we are. We don't have the power to change and morph. Maybe some mystic have been able to do it. There are many psychic powers that have been developed in mysticism, which I don't care to dive into, because the true mystic always says, don't get distracted with that. That's just going to take away time for your own incursion into the fullness of the creation. But we must admit that these powers exist. In any case, that's because our mind, our conscious mind complex, is able to do this. That's what we are. But then they say the fifth density entity may dissolve one manifestation and create another. It simply, is formless. It has touched with that power which is formless within itself, and then by being formless, it can be any form. Consequently, the choice of a fifth density entity or complex of entities. So here's the explanation as to why fifth density entities look like us to us. It's a very important distinction here. If they are formless, how come they look like us? Well, they say the choice of a fifth density entity or complex of entities, this is positive and negative, by the way, wishing to communicate with your peoples would choose to resemble your people's physical complex, chemical yellow ray vehicles. In essence, if I am formless and I want to talk to you, I would obviously don't want to look like a deformed rhinoceros. Why would I do that? I would probably scare you. So I would take, the shape of someone that you may be familiar with. And this is why I have so many speculations here. But when we see, especially in near-death experiences, we see that our ancestors are there. Yes, they are in form, but in essence, it's our own love, the God basically taking the shape of our ancestors to greet us back into our home, where we come from, which is not this illusory physical planet. This is not in any way saying that this planet is illusory. It's just that what we see out here is illusory. The planet is as real as can be. So much to discuss here, but at least I got that covered, and I'm happy for that. Fifth density entities create their own form depending on how they want to look. Question 8, Don says, I see. Very roughly, if you were to move a third density entity from some other planet to this planet, roughly what percentage of all of those within the knowledge of Ra would look enough like those entities of Earth so that they would go unnoticed in a crowd? It's a very particular question, and Ra says 5%. So if you didn't understand the question, it's very simple. Of all, I don't even know how Ra could give 5%. It must be like a very short estimate. But maybe to Ra's knowledge, right? Isn't that what Don asked? Yeah, within the knowledge of Ra, okay. How many of the third density entities that are out there would look like us, humans, and go unnoticed? Like you could see somebody and say, oh, that's just another human. They say 5%. So 5%, 95% of the population of third density looks not like us. So again, this has to do, at this level of which we're talking about, just to refresh it, we're talking about third density. So 5% of second density planets, or that within Ra's knowledge, they look like us. Okay, human form, primates kind of thing. Yeah, so it's the legacy of second density. It's not that they choose to look like us, it's just that the legacy of their second density was very similar to us, and we would look like them. Now keep in mind that 5%, because we're going to get another percentage. I think I'm going to get to that question. Let's find out. In question 9, Don says, then there is an extreme variation in the form of the physical vehicle in third density in the universe. No surprise. I assume this is also true for fourth density. Is this correct? Yes, of course, if they look just like us, or just like themselves. Ross says, this is so. We remind you that it is a great theoretical distance between demanding that the creatures of an infinite creation be unnoticeably similar to oneself and observing those signs which may be called human, which denote the third density characteristics of self-consciousness, the grouping into pairs, societal groups, and races, and further characteristic means of using self-consciousness to refine and search for the meaning of the milieu. So the definition of milieu would be that of the surroundings, our not landscape, or our surroundings are this, it's going to look something like that. In any case, we remind you that a great theoretical distance, so in essence, it's very, it's very difficult to theorize that, certain people are going to look like you in an infinite creation. That's basically what they said. And observing those signs, and even the way we behave culturally, it's obviously known to us because it depends on our makeup, on how we structure our groupings and how we behave with each other. Everything is so different. Of course, this makes sense. I know in science we tend to think that, oh no, because we are, the example of self-consciousness, then other self-consciousness must look like us. But that's not the case. I mean, when we look at a creation not made out of parts, so many things change. This is why realizing, in science at least, and there are scientists who have been exploring this more and more seriously in the past couple of decades, it's important to establish that this is not a universe made out of particles. This is a universe that is made out of consciousness. This is not something new. 100 years ago or more, our physicists, like Planck and others, they basically realized and said, oh, consciousness is the basis of everything, especially in quantum physics. You can't deny that. So we have to start thinking this way, so we be more aligned with what's happening really. Otherwise, we get into this dark philosophical view of the universe, which is what materialist science or scientism has developed over time, and this grim and dark view, which it's fun. I mean, I come from that background. I came from looking at heat death. That's it. And consciousness is just electromagnetic biases that have been collected over a lifetime for this animal, and they will dissolve into electrostatic. That was my thinking back then. Everything goes, to ashes. So I know how this feels, and we need to come out of that if we are to evolve, which is happening regardless. It's just how much we want to accelerate it on an individual level. However, what Ra is describing here is that, yes, it's kind of difficult to say this, right? We have to look quite different. That's basically what it is. We have to look quite different in even the way we group and, our races and everything else. It's just so different. All of this is affected by the milieu, this surroundings, this landscape, this planet, that seasons, and our choices, polarization, and so on. All of this influences. I have a theory that your mind, depending on how traumatized you are or how beautiful you are in terms of loving the creation, your physical form changes, right? Your mind is shaping your face in a way, and so people are born with specific biases and directions, and so they take that form. Not fully, but certain characteristics are there. So we're shaping this. We're shaping reality in ways that we cannot understand. So I think there was a good what should I call it, comment from Ra. Let's go to the next question. Don says in question 10, well, within Ra's knowledge of third density physical forms, what percentage would be similar enough to this planet's physical form that we would assume the entity to be human, even though they were a bit different? This would have to be very rough because of my definition being very rough. Again, this now he's expanding and saying, Well, what if they look a little bit like us, but different, not exactly like us? Ross says this percentage is still small, perhaps 13 to 15%, due to the capabilities of various second density life forms to carry out each necessary function of third density work. Thusly, to be observed would be behavior indicating self-consciousness and purposeful interaction with a sentiment, interaction with a sentient ambience about the entity, rather than those characteristics which familiarly connote your people's, the humanity of your third density form. In short, I would say, and then we'll reread it again. In short, they're saying that, well, if they are only to be recognized as third density behavior, then between 13 and 15%. Now, what is this third density behavior? Well, self-consciousness. Those behaviors that indicate self-consciousness. What does that mean? I ask questions. I am inquisitive. I know that I am. This is self-consciousness. Things that are beginning to be developed in all second density forms, to one degree or another, to primitive forms like insects, to major, very intelligent, almost self-conscious beings like mammals, for example, or elephants, dogs, animals that cows even, of course, porks, and some of more animals that we eat. They are starting to develop this self-consciousness, right? So that's what Ra is saying, like, okay, if we're just gonna group them into what we recognize as self-consciousness, and their interaction with a sentient ambience, this milieu, this surroundings that we call the ecosystem, nature, then yes, instead of those characteristics which are features of you humans, right? You humans look like this and have a nose, and you stand tall and you do these activities. If we bar that out and only concentrate on things that we can recognize as third density, then only 13 to 15% would be recognizable by us. You see, there are so, and I don't know if we're going to get to that question, but Ra talks about how different other third density experiences may look like. It's baffling, actually. But okay. Have I said enough that I could spend hours here? I'm going to try to cover one more question, unless it's short, and then I'll cover two. And that'll leave us in a good territory for next session. Don says, in question 11, now my line of questioning. He pauses and says, I'm trying to link to the creation of various logos and their original use of a system of archetypes in their creation, and I apologize for possibly a lack of efficiency in doing this, but I find this somewhat difficult. Now, for this particular logos in the beginning, prior to its creation of first density, did the archetypical system which it had chosen for its creations include the forms that would evolve, and in particular third density human form, or was this related to the archetypical concept at all? Ross says the choice of form is prior to the formation of the archetypical mind. As the logos creates its plan for evolution, then the chosen form is invested. I think this is going to make a great segue for next session, so I'm just going to leave it at this, because then we're going to talk about the archetypical mind a little bit, and then expand in terms of form of third density in this particular logos. Again, if you're new to the channel and you're listening to this for the first time, when we talk about the logos, we're talking about the regional locus of the creator, which is the sun, that which created the solar system, or that which is the solar system, because every part of the solar system is the sun. Remember that there was a disk accretion of matter or light surrounding the sun that created the planets, the Oort cloud, the Kuiper belt, asteroid belt, which was, according to the law of one model, Maldek, and all the other planets, whether you want to count Pluto as a planet or not, that seems to be preferential at this point, but everything else, that if you want to call it Oort cloud or actually Kuiper belt, planetoid, or whatever it is that is called now, fine, but everything is the sun. That's the logos. So that's what Don's question is here. He's saying, trying to link what the form that these logos created, or at least this one in particular, right? He says for this particular logos, prior to its creation. And so he introduces the archetypical mind here to see, was the archetypical mind that has chosen, right? He says, did the archetypical system which it had chosen for its creation include the forms that we would evolve? So basically, sun or logos, plan for creation, archetypical mind, and then form. And Ra says, no, choice of form is prior to the archetypical mind. Interesting, right? Because remember, the archetypical mind is that which informs experience, is not that which describes form. And so more questions are going to be asked here, but that enters a new line of questioning, as Don actually appropriately said here. And I'm just going to leave it at that, because that's perfect to finish this session, or not this session, but this episode. Conclusions. The most important, let me put this, because I think it's important. I normally say, you can probably sense how excited I was with this session. Because I love models of the creation. My whole life I was interested in astrophysics, and no surprising, I was attracted to chemistry and biology by trade in my job of over a decade in a corporation, because I love science. I just love it, and I love seeing these models. However, I would admit that this only graces on the importance of this knowledge that we're getting, this the heart of the teaching here by Ra, the Law of One, because it's just igniting curiosity, and it's igniting a bit of a interest into how things work. All of these are avenues that take us into the mystical search for unity. So what did we get out of all of this that is directly related to the mystical search for unity? The fact that we live in a paradigm, we still live in a paradigm. I mean, we're bombarded by it everywhere, and our system of life is directed by this paradigm, which is we are creatures that are physical, and we do take care of our body. I mean, this is not an error. We need to take care of our body, but we need to put too much importance in our body, right? Because we need to survive, we need to protect ourselves, and all of this. This is true to a degree, but there is more to that, is what we're trying to say here. We're not saying don't take care of your body. No, it's take care of your body, but not like it's the only thing that exists. There is more to explore, and that is your true nature. Your true nature is not body parts, is not this physical realm. Your true nature is beyond that. In fact, this is a product of your true nature. So exploring that is what I said, consciousness as the model for reality. Everything is consciousness. Interestingly, the path that I took, which is the direct path, discusses this consciousness only model in a beautiful way that we can all investigate. We don't need some sort of yogi insight to realize this, although all yogis' insights are based on this recognition of true being. You see, we don't need to create a Dyson sphere to harness the power of the sun so we can finally power a quantum computer that can solve this. We don't have to take that way either, and we don't have to break down reality to its constituents to find the true nature of ourselves. No, all we need to do is investigate the nature of being, which I am already. And so when you do this, you have to have a moment of insight in which you say, oh, yes, this is proof that everything is consciousness. Once you do that, it's all about searching the implications of this and continue to validate it in your experience. So this is where we move from belief to knowing. And that, my friend, is liberation of mind, of spirit, of body, everything. How do we do this? We investigate into the nature of who we are. We ask the question, who am I? And we go to the bottom of it, to the very bottom of our own capabilities, and we find that which we are. If you're interested in this, you know where to find me. Instagram is the way to contact me, so I can tell you more about how this works and what we do in this teaching, which again is the Vedantic path of Advaita, and we simply call it the direct experience or direct path into direct experience for self-realization. Links in the description as usual. I have nothing else to say, but thank you. I'm really excited to finish this session because there's so much to talk about. And like I said, in the next part, we're going to cover more about this choice of form and why do we look like this on planet Earth? What's the purpose? So fascinating. So I hope to see you there. If you have nothing, I have nothing else to say, but if you have nothing else to do, just as usual, like, subscribe, do those things that, or comment also. All of these things help to reach out more people, which is my goal. Thank you again. Have a nice day, good night, whatever you are. And I'll see you in part 2 of session 90.